Back to school. China is on track to reopen its schools with COVID-19 confinement measures now in place. What effect has the closure had on the situation and the education of young people and the well-being of students? How is the pandemic reshaping education? With the virus still raging in many countries around the world, what are the prospects for schools reopening? To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Professor Xue Lan, Dean of the Schwarzman College of Tsinghua University, Dr. Megan Rainey, emergency physician at Brown University, and Li Jinchi, an MA student at University of Sydney. Later in the show, we'll be joining by Dr. Alice Hong-Kyung-Tan, internist at the Miss Medi Women's Hospital. And that is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Megan, let me start with you. In China, students in tens of millions are returning to school in September. But we have not seen home infection cases, new home infection cases in this country. How do you look at China's reopening its schools?
So given the relatively low numbers of new infections in China, it is most likely safe to reopen schools. We know that all things being equal, it's best for kids to be back in school for their social, emotional, academic, and physical health. Of course, during the worst of the pandemic, we balanced that out because the risk of infection was greater than the risk to their social and emotional health. But if there's a low community level of spread, it's most likely safe for kids to be back in school, of course, assuming that you're taking the appropriate precautions such as universal masking and physical distancing whenever possible.
But do you think the students going back to school this year will be anything different? Because as you said, many are still practicing social distancing rules. They are still reluctant to gather together to have some social activities. What will that mean for the new students?
I think that this school year is going to be tremendously different from anything that kids have ever experienced before. Whether we're talking about young children who are first going to school, this is going to be tough for them. It's also going to be tough for the older students, for teenagers and university students who are being encouraged to maintain more distance, to not go to parties. Extracurricular activities such as sports are going to be different. This is absolutely going to be a different school year for both teachers, staff, and for the kids.
And Jinchi, I know that you've been pursuing a degree in Australia. It hasn't been very easy for you to get there. What impact is this having on you?
Well, first, mentally, I think now, because of the COVID-19, we couldn't really go out and hang out with our friends as much as we used to do. So this pandemic is actually taking a heavy toll on a lot of students' mental health, including me. So now we're more easily to get depressed, and we can even feel a little bit isolated. And financially, and I know a lot of students before COVID-19, they got a few part-time jobs, but since the pandemic, they've been let go. And but now the good thing is, universities like the University of Sydney is now providing students who are now experiencing financial difficulties with some emergency financial aid, which I think is pretty great. And another problem that I think a lot of students, including me, that we're experiencing is that some of the Chinese students that I know, they're actually thinking about actually taking a gap year. But the thing is, the reason why they were thinking about doing it was simply because they hope maybe next year things would be different and everything would get back to normal. But the problem is, no one is for sure when this pandemic will end.
Yeah. But yes, indeed, this is a once in a 100-year event. So, Jinchi, are you well adjusted to this new reality? Have you been resilient enough to learn with the new difficulties?
Well, I think now, because we've been practicing social distancing since last semester, for now, I think I've already got used to it. I know how to cope with it. So now every time before going out, I would always wear my mask, and every time before walking into my room, because now I'm actually living in this international student accommodation. So I'm living with 3 other students from other countries. So every time before walking into the apartment, I would always like apply some hand sanitizer and rub it all around my hands. So yeah, and now I think I'm totally used to this new like normality.
Oh. We've also collected some social media users' opinions on the opening of schools all around the world, and what does it mean for the either young students, new students, or those students have to get back to school in a different situation. Joe Blow said that in-school plans are inadequate, must have 2-meter distancing for students and teachers, upgraded ventilation with HEPA filtration and rapid air changes, rapid testing of suspected carriers, daily reports to parents with any COVID development details. Well, that's his or her threshold for getting back to school. But Megan, do you think in countries even like the United States can practicing such stringent protocols so that the students will not get infected or spread this disease around?
So as you know, the United States is a group of 50 different states with 50 very different sets of regulations and also very different rates of community spread of COVID-19. So as we're reopening across the country right now, as we're reopening schools across the country, we're seeing very different protocols in different states and even different counties. Florida has largely reopened in person. Other states have gone largely to distance learning. In my own home state of Rhode Island, we're going to be deciding later today which kids are going to go back to school in person and which are going to go to online learning. There is a lack of public funding for those very necessary safety measures like masks and physical distancing and improved ventilation, which makes it a little tougher here to reopen. But the biggest issue here in the United States is that we haven't yet stopped that first wave of the pandemic. We have an awful lot of communities across the country that are still experiencing high rates of infection that make it tough to say that it's safe to put kids or staff back in school.
Is there a national guideline that is held by all the people in the United States? Because we learned that at least 36 states have reported positive cases at colleges and universities. So how is the U.S. dealing with the resurgence, the second wave? And we've been told that the CDC recommends not testing asymptomatic carriers. Will that be a risky thing for the students?
Yeah, so the CDC provides guidelines for schools and daycares, but the schools and daycares are not obligated to follow those, and many states and counties have provided more stringent or different guidelines. Again, my own home state of Rhode Island, we've provided much more detailed guidance to our schools about reopening plans and how to deal with the inevitable positive cases within the school setting. Now, the CDC's new guidance on testing of asymptomatic people is something that many of us in the public health community are frustrated with, and actually the CDC has walked that back a little bit since that initial announcement last week. To clarify, what they said is that asymptomatic contacts of a known positive COVID-19 case did not necessarily need to be tested as long as they didn't have symptoms. That's not really where the scientific evidence lies right now, and as a result, many private universities and private schools are still doing asymptomatic testing. Many states are also still doing asymptomatic testing, which really is the right thing to do from a public health perspective.
And Ginger, what about Australia? Do you go to school with any concerns about enough testing is being done on campus? What kind of precautions do you take?
Now, actually, now I'm currently studying in the University of Sydney. Now, the majority of classes in the University of Sydney are actually online lessons. there are only a small amount of classes that are offline. I guess like for offline lessons, there are like strict protocols we need to like really do. Like we have to always like stay away from each other for at least like 1.5 meters, which I think is a good thing. And now like a lot of students like in the campus, we can see more and more people like wearing masks wherever they go, which I think is a good thing. And this is what I see like from the University of Sydney.
And do you get tested on a regular basis?
No, people. I don't think a lot of students have got themselves tested, and I think students only would like go to CDC to get themselves tested only when there are symptoms showing up, or else people don't really feel like the necessity to go out there and get themselves tested.
So Professor Xuelan, I presume you're on the line. Of course,
yes,
different countries have different scenarios because China has such a low case load here nationally. That's why probably authorities decided we can open all the schools. But still, there are fears that the pandemic might resurge in autumn and winter. So do you think the confidence of the Chinese authorities are justified to open schools in September?
Well, I think it is. I think, first of all, I think as you all know that China was the first country that sort of really sort of contained the spread. And since then, I think that the government has not loosened the measures in terms of controlling the spread. And so what we've seen that whenever there's some locality, when there's any sort of new cases, there's immediate sort of measures being taken to track the people who might have been contacted, and then then sort of being then people will be tested and being measures being taken. So I think that and also I think there were also quite a few large-scale testing in cities like Beijing, Wuhan, and so on, and you find that the case is extremely low, and so I think that's the general case, and also that. Now the incoming cases from outside China also has been very carefully sort of monitored. Sort of 14 days quarantine. So all of that really I think sort of in a way sort of maintains a relatively I think much more safer environment overall. I think people do worry about the resurgence. So I think that. I think different provinces and have all never sort of loosened their measures. So I think that you will see that I mean, of course, schools are taking more tighter measures, but even in different cities, you always have whenever you go to the office buildings and so on, there are all kinds of measures in terms of maintaining personal hygiene, and also the environment, is being very much cleaned. So I think all of that sort of adds together. So I think at the moment, I think certainly that's very safe, and we certainly want to be vigilant. In case things change, I think the things will change. I think as we've seen that when new cases surfaced, and the locality will change their the region from low risk to mid-level risk, and sometimes even to the high risk. So really depending on the situation.
About the infectability of the young people, the WHO and UNICEF said that according to available evidence, young children may be less susceptible to infection than adults. So Megan, however, available data suggests that this may vary by age, and also we don't know how much virus that kids can carry and shed those viruses when and how. So what kind of risks are these students going to school and carrying the virus back to their homes and spread them to their parents and grandparents?
Yeah, so one of the big things that I keep saying about this virus is that it is new. We are still accumulating scientific evidence about so many aspects of this novel coronavirus, how it spreads, who it spreads to, who it makes sick. There is growing evidence that kids actually can catch COVID-19 and can get sick. Here in the United States, we've seen increasing number of kids who have been testing positive, increasing number of kids who have been hospitalized, and of course children who have died from COVID-19. Moreover, there are a number of new important studies, particularly coming out of South Korea, showing that children are not immune to spreading, or not only not immune to the virus, but also can spread it to their household contacts. So whereas early on we thought that kids wouldn't catch it and wouldn't spread it, now the evidence is suggesting that kids can catch it, can spread it, and do have levels of the virus that are as high as sick adults. There's still a lot we don't know, though. So when you ask me how easy is it for kids to catch it and spread it to their parents and to their grandparents, I simply can't answer that right now. What I do know is that having kids in school in communities where there are high levels of COVID-19, unless the kids and the teachers are both wearing masks and are physically distanced and there's good ventilation, all those things we've already talked about, unless all those things are in place, kids and staff are going to get sick. And we know that the older teachers and staff are at high risk. Again, we also increasingly think that kids can catch COVID-19 and bring it home. So it's why it's important to keep the kids out of school if there are high rates of COVID-19, and even in the lower risk communities to make sure that they're practicing those proper public health measures.
And we have Dr. Alice Tan online. Alice, is this the reason why South Korea postponed the opening of the schools? Because South Koreans have been doing some research on children carrying the virus and infecting others.
Well, what happened was we had a start to school, but then August 14th, we started having multiple outbreaks throughout our country. And whereas our first big outbreak was in a city called Daegu, which was a population of 1.5 million, this current outbreak is centered in the Seoul metropolitan area. Population here is 20 million. If you take into account Seoul, the capital city, Gyeonggi province, and Incheon city, we are all next to each other. One of the highest population densities in the world, and the outbreak is raging right now. And so 1 week ago, the Seoul Ministry of Education noticed that there were 193 students and staff that had gotten infected in the last 2 weeks. And they decided to completely stop school altogether, except for high school seniors. And for the rest of all of the other K through 11 students, they have been converted now to online learning only. And only the high school seniors are allowed on campus. And that's because, of course, their national college entrance examination is less than 100 days away. And there are no plans for postponing that test yet. And so we felt that we needed to prioritize their learning in class and make sure that we can get face-to-face learning available for them. But for all of the other students, it has essentially shut down, and everything, the entire curriculum is online.
So Jinshu, actually school can mean very different things in 2020 for students like you. So Jinshu, what do you feel your education has been changed, as a matter of fact, by COVID?
I think now, because like a lot of course that now we're taking are online, and like so people just have different ideas about online lessons. Some of them like it, some of them don't. I guess like the sentiment just like varies from person to person. For some students who are more disciplined, they just enjoy having online classes like at home, because it can really help them save a lot of like time and money. For like time-wise, it can really just like like with by studying online at home, they don't really need to commute between unis and homes, and like money-wise, because rent is really a huge part of students' monthly expense. So yeah, it's a great benefit like for them. But for some students who are less disciplined, their minds can wander off from time to time, which is not good for their long-term learning experience. And Yeah, and also I think for some students, like I do have a friend who's now studying in Melbourne, and now she's studying hotel management. She's trying to be creative in terms of online learning. She has a habit of listening to classes while walking, or sometimes she would just dress herself up in business suits. So this would make her like feel that, wow, I'm doing serious stuff.
So,
she
is.
Yeah,
She's
this way
indeed
she can get
creative
more serious about
and disciplined. But Professor Xue, what about those not only less disciplined or less privileged because they don't have access to internet access or even a decent home? According to UNESCO, over 100 countries are implementing nationwide school closures, affecting over 60% of the students around the world. So, global education emergency. What are the costs on this generation of young people, Professor Xue?
Yes, indeed. I think this is something that I think a lot of us have or concerned about. As I think that, as you mentioned, that of course now we are relying a lot on the internet access, but at the same time there are even in the case of China we still have somewhere around 40% or plus people who don't have access to internet. For those people, I think then of course how to cope with the situation is much more challenging. So I think that that in a way that we have internet and so on that can address a lot of the problems we have, but also we need to find other ways to really try to narrow the gap of the so-called digital gap. Without effort in that, I think that the COVID is only adding to the polarization of the income and other sort of gaps we have.
And Megan, of course, there are psychological and emotional tolls there, of course, and also the social and behavioral academic achievement of children because of the long time closure would be huge. How can family, society, and government help?
That is a huge question. I think the first and biggest thing is dealing with that digital divide that was just mentioned, to make broadband internet access available to all children. We've seen some heartbreaking photos here in the United States of kids having to sit outside of a fast food restaurant to get Wi-Fi access to do their homework. That's not fair, and it's going to worsen the educational gaps for our most vulnerable and disadvantaged youth. The next thing, of course, is for families to do their best to create emotional stability for their kids. But that's easier for some families than others, and schools serve a really important purpose for a lot of kids in terms of keeping them physically safe, keeping them fed, and again, providing emotional support services. So one of the things that we're doing here in the United States is trying to figure out how to provide those support services remotely or through socially distanced formats. But the bigger question of what are we going to do with this generation of kids who are largely missing a full year of their school, that's something that I think we're going to be grappling with as a society and as a world for years and years to come.
And Alice, people have to do learning online, but online learning also has its negative side, not only for students, probably also for teachers and parents. Parents sometimes have to choose to work at home so that they can take care of their kids when they're having online discussions or doing homework. So what do you think online learning mean for both students and teachers and parents?
Right. So actually, in Korea, we are going through a huge second wave, and so we're in level 2.5 social distancing and our highest level is 3. And so many offices now have converted to working from home, and so parents are now working at home as their children are studying online. Still, there are parents who do have to leave the home to go to work, and so the public school system has a after-school care program that is available that students and families can sign up for, so that kids are not left at home alone. And so there is supervision available through the public education system. But it is definitely a very, very challenging situation. Here in Korea, we do have the advantage of being one of the most wired countries in the world. We have a lot of tech support here in terms of industries. LG, Samsung, of course, they have really stepped up. They've donated hundreds of thousands of devices so that children in lower socioeconomic classes have access to devices. Data-free learning has been made available, and then there's a lot of curriculum that's available just through the educational broadcast system. That's just a TV channel that kids can they don't have to log in. They just turn on the TV, and at certain hours they can just watch the programming. So we're trying to make the best of a very difficult situation. But in terms of working from home, also studying from home, the smallest children, I would say the youngest children, it's most difficult for them because they don't have the interaction, they don't have that peer-to-peer playtime, which is so essential to development at that young age. So I completely agree. It's, we will, as a society, as a world, have to grapple with the consequences of children not having been in school for really a whole year.
And Ginger, do you have any suggestions on how to keep your attention stay while doing online courses?
Well, as I said before, I think like what one of my friends did was pretty creative. Just like do some, dress yourself formally, so you would realize that I have to take what I'm going to do very seriously. Or just like, like before the online lesson starts, just like try to, I mean, we can try to like start studying even before the Zoom classes starts. So that can just like make us like realize, okay, the lesson is going to start. So I think this way it should be better.
And Megan, if you are conducting classes to students online, what would be your tricks to attract them, to keep their attention?
Yeah, so here at my university at Brown, we have delayed in-person classes until early October at the earliest, recognizing that there are a lot of hotspots around the United States and it wasn't safe to bring kids back. So we are doing online classes. I've also been doing online lectures since spring. Some of the many techniques that we're using are using Zoom in really innovative ways with breakout rooms, with interactive polls, making sure that we have interactive homework assignments that allow the students to meet in small groups or comment on each other's work online, and making sure that we have more regular online check-ins. We've been doing some really hard work around trying to create a culture and a networking component for our students online.
As much social life online as possible. Well, thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Ginger. And thank you, Professor Xue. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zhou Yue. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.